Okay.
Okay, good evening, everyone from Hong Kong, and wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to Hope for Hong Kong, an Asia-Pacific Writers and Translators reading event. My name is Antony Dapiran. I'm a writer based here in Hong Kong and the author of the book City on Fire, The Fight for Hong Kong, and I'll be moderating this evening's readings. So like many of you, I'm sure I'm not overly fond of clumsy weather metaphors. But what meteorologists call a tropical depression has been passing through the South China Sea near Hong Kong these past few days. The rain has been lashing the windows of my apartment, the wind squalls whistling in the gaps around the ill-fitting balcony door. And any of you who have been following the news coming out of Hong Kong in the past week can see where a weather metaphor along these lines might be heading. But I'll avoid drawing any such connection, not only because of my aversion to clumsy weather metaphors, but also because the purpose of today's event is not to analyze recent developments in Hong Kong. But with today's event, Hope for Hong Kong, our kind hosts, the Asia-Pacific Writers and Translators, are providing, as you might have read on the flyer, a platform for peaceful, non-sectarian advocacy of freedom of speech. And now, having just mentioned the words Hong Kong and freedom of speech in the same sentence, I do feel obliged to say just a few words about recent developments in Hong Kong, for after all, that is what is bringing us together tonight. I'm going to do that by quoting to you some words that were printed on a banner, purple in color. The banner is in the style of the warning banners that Hong Kong police display to a crowd before they fire tear gas at them or rubber bullets or worse. The first time I saw a photograph of this purple banner, I laughed. I laughed because I thought it was satire. I mean, the following words printed in white on that purple banner could surely be nothing more than a joke, right? The words read, and I quote, "You are displaying flags or banners, chanting slogans, or conducting yourselves with an intent such as secession or subversion, which may constitute offences under the HKSAR national security law. You may be arrested and prosecuted." The banner was not a joke. And shortly after displaying that banner for the first time on the 1st of July, exactly 1 month ago today, Hong Kong police would make their first arrests under the national security law of a man found to be in possession of a flag and wearing a t-shirt bearing forbidden words, and of 2 young women handing out stickers, again bearing forbidden words. To those of us in Hong Kong, this was wholly new and alien. Until 1 month ago, the very idea of there being forbidden words in Hong Kong was laughable. But no one is laughing now. Not when police raid pro-democracy restaurants and demand that they tear down Lenin walls, those colourful displays of pro-democracy posters and slogans because they contain forbidden words. Not when 4 teenagers are dragged from their homes in the middle of the night and arrested for posting forbidden words to a Facebook account. We are writers, so how do we respond to this attack on words, which are the only thing that we as writers at the end of the day have? How can we express hope for Hong Kong here tonight? I mentioned my aversion to clumsy weather metaphors, but these last few weeks, before this typhoon rolled in, the skies over Hong Kong have been clear and blue. You might want to call it COVID blue. The skyline, normally draped in a permanent haze, has come into sharp focus as across the border, the factories of southern China, which in normal times would be churning out a permanent stream of air pollution alongside their plastic goods and consumer electronics for the hungry world, have fallen quiet. And through the COVID blue skies from my apartment window, I could see the craggy face of Lion Rock towering over Kowloon. And I remembered that on Mid-Autumn Festival Eve last year, people climbed to the top of Lion Rock and shone flashlights and laser beams out across Kowloon, across Victoria Harbour, all the way to Victoria Peak on Hong Kong Island, where people stood shining their lights back again, little beacons of hope exchanged in the night. And I'm reminded that whether it's a COVID blue sky or a sky shrouded in tropical rains, whether we can see it or not, Lion Rock is still there, as are all the people living underneath the Lion Rock. So how can we as writers express hope for Hong Kong? The answer, at least in my mind, is to keep doing what we've always done. We must use that one thing that we have, our words. Wu wei wu ju, without fear. So our readers are gathering here tonight to celebrate Hong Kong, to celebrate freedom of speech, and to send out to people near or far who love this city under the Lion Rock some little beacons of hope through our words. Now, this is a reading event, and ordinarily we'd be holding this in a cafe or a bar or some other similarly congenial venue. So our readers will be challenged somewhat tonight by the lack of human feedback that we get in a live reading, the laughter hopefully coming where it's intended, the hums after a particularly striking turn of phrase, and of course the applause. But you're very welcome to leave comments, which we can see. And we'll do our best to recreate the atmosphere of a reading. And I hope that you'll all do the same at home. Turn the lights down to club setting, pour yourself a decent glass of wine, and sit back and enjoy. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our first reader, Jennifer Wong. Jennifer was born and raised in Hong Kong and is the author of 3 collections of poetry, including Goldfish, published by Chameleon Press. Her latest, Letters Home, which you can see here, by Nine Arches Press, and a pamphlet, Diary of a Miu Miu Salesgirl, from Bitter Melon Poetry. Her poems have appeared in magazines including The Rialto, Stand, Oxford Poetry, Magma Poetry, Asian Cha, Voice and Verse, and World Literature Today. Her reviews and translations of Chinese poetry have appeared in Poetry Review, Pathlight, and Modern Poetry in Translation. She has an MA in creative writing from the University of East Anglia and a PhD in creative writing from Oxford Brookes. And so, Jenny, welcome. And please, what would you like to read for us this evening?
Thank you very much, Antony. And it's a delight to read with all of you here in this new space that we have created. I would like to read a few poems from the latest collection. The first poem has to do with so I studied in high school in Hong Kong, and back then I wasn't thinking too much about the sort of classes that we gave, the classes that we attended. I wasn't quite sure altogether what they mean. Back then, it was all just for us. We enjoyed each other's company. We loved literature, and we also found all the stories that we talked about in literature and other classes very exciting. But nowadays, looking back, I realize what we really care about, and this is a poem dedicated to that. And also, looking back, I think one of the classes that I wish I have paid more attention to is history. And you see why. Diocesan Girls' School, 1990 to 1997. We sing English hymns from the Blue Book as if those songs were our own songs, all things bright and beautiful. We read Jane Eyre and Hard Times, and How the Pig Suppressed Boxer and Clover in Animal Farm. In Chinese history lessons, we follow the roots of a ginkgo tree to spring and autumn, when Confucius taught his disciples Ren Yi. Western history, the rise and fall of empires, a cartoon from Punch 1840, China, a cake gobbled up by foreign powers. In poetry, we fall in love with Plath, her fantasies and her fury against men. We want to let out our anguish. Some of us stammer in our own tongue. It's inferior, we know it. Secretly, we all love to sing cantopop. We dream of going away to England or America and never coming back. for quite a while, I worked in the government actually, and that was more by chance rather than my deliberate plan. And this poem was kind of like a letter that I wrote for myself, trying to kind of think of what would I have said to myself, that self that joined the government right after uni, the sort of work that I did, now altogether made some sense. And I still remember one of the very vivid memories that I have as a government officer was like working with some government officers to check out a sort of an explosion that happened in a very local residential estate. And we were there at midnight working with other firemen and policemen and all that. And I still feel that it's very important to know the needs of a community and to be with the people, to know what they really want and to understand them. And it has to do with that, like that hope that we were talking about. And back then I have a code, like everyone's known as a code. So this is letter to AST7. Those 3 years I thought I learned nothing, did nothing except perfect my skill for stapling important looking papers and building an immaculate policy folder that someone could bring along to read in a chauffeured car, dreaming of questions and finding the answers to riddles I could not solve. How and when do you add more land to build new homes? Why won't you close the gap between the rich and the poor? When will Fei Yong be paid enough for looking after all our children? How long do we have to wait for our dream government? I once talked to the firemen and policemen well past midnight outside blocks of flats after a gas explosion, grieving with the families against broken windows and blackened kitchen walls. The year of the bird flu, we went about our business with masks and gloves. To put on a helmet and a safety jacket, enter a tunnel unbuilt, to imagine a new station, to have read all those folders and to stay calm at all times. And in the evenings, coming home late, to look out of a taxi window at a diamond skyline for a continuous 30 minutes, as if in cinema. Building after building, one family living in each tiny cube of light, the thin walls between them, and to question that historical self many years later. Another poem that, so in making this this collection, I started off actually writing this long poem, and this is one of the poems that actually I wrote them in Hong Kong, and it kind of kept on and on. I just started collecting images about places that I really love in Hong Kong, places that I like to go a lot, or people that I've met, and so it's altogether become Mountain City. And that back then I was teaching in Lingnan, and I also feel that it's just interesting how seeing, like, actually being in that city and being in Hong Kong gives me so many different feelings, and also the paradox in Hong Kong, like how you have different languages together, different ethnicities, people with different ideas all come together, the expat community and the local Chinese community, how different their lives are, all fascinate me. And so I thought, like, I will read to you like some section from that poem. You might be able to recognize some of this, and some of them in Chinese. 3. Was it last month in Hong Kong that I dared you to try the black soup at the herbalist? We took some time to decide between chicken bone leaf or yasei mei bitter tea. A worm in the winter was grass in the summer. We hastened our steps towards motel signs, hourly available, purely room only. Had we arrived in 2046? What secret had Zhao Mo Wan buried in the tree trunk? In 2046, we'll be left with a city of capsule hotels and beautiful robots in tears. I wonder why anyone would pine for an afternoon tea under the colonial fans of a hotel lobby, except, of course, it's the mark of a true Siu Lai Lai, served by a moon maid who brings healing with her magical massages and postpartum recipes. For the whole month, the mother is forbidden to wash her hair. 4. 於遊客, Mr. Tourist, Qingdao beer and Lonely Planet in your hands, you overtip our cab drivers. In times of typhoon, you join those who flock to Star Ferry Pier and watch choppy waves while we stay in, watching TV. How much do you know about the Yellow River and the Yangtze? This city often forgets how Chinese it is. If you walk past Temple, Wusong, and Battery Streets, past the fabric shops, past the fruit stalls with red lamps, and a million bric-a-brac, you eventually reach Goodrich Hotel. When it was a colony, those tycoons used to glue plastic flowers in factories, queued for rice rations. I hardly remember growing up in these buildings upon buildings, my motherland, the memory of a bell tower in the north, a drum tower in the south, then in between the phantasmagoria of an Oxford life. But what of returning? An office overlooking the harbour. You mouth the same words as everyone else. Teamwork, social responsibility. Flip open your diary. Look for the earliest date for your vacation. After 6, you descend and disappear into the same streets. Fit yourself into the packed train that carries you home. That little plot of earth on the 22nd story with a hint of the sea. On your way back from a colleague's funeral, you take out a Bohemia face coin to pay the taxi driver, knowing you can't bring the coin home. Whereas Lyndhurst Terrace has always meant a colourful street of blossoms. Let us go to Happy Valley to place our biggest stake and never return. In Lingland's canteen, flipping through the menu for foreigners, I try to understand why Jing Sam Sik Dan is translated into steaming 3 kinds of egg. I turn back to my Murakami. So when will we call things by their real names? There's no treasure in Zhang Bozai's cave. In Lady Market Bazaar, you ask me, how do you distinguish real jade from fake jade? I say, why does it matter? The real, the fake, the old or the new? Why, the minibus station still reads Daimaru department store, closed down for years. Can't you tell that even the new territories are growing old? Take a ride on West Rail to see how the many crescent-shaped feng shui graves are dotted about the hills. Don't be afraid, for everyone must drink the soup from Old Lady Mung by the river of forgetfulness. You hope that the gifts we ban can reach them all right. I just hope that the birds in my poll will stay until their next migration. I will finish with one last poem, a short poem, and it's a much lighter one, and I think personal history of soups. And I think in Hong Kong, many people will understand that soup has a very important value for Chinese people in keeping their minds and body nourished. And I hope that in this difficult time of Hong Kong, that people can really think about the kind of positive and beautiful things and the things that all of us share, the values and the culture that we really value a lot. A personal history of soups. You taught me soups. A loaf or tong takes hours in the kitchen. Pig lung, best remedy for coughs. The swelling and collapsing of a massive pink sac filling the basin. Yellow cucumber and cowpea nourishes the skin and clears the throat. Chinese courgette and lean pork dissipates body heat. My brother and I loved your tomato and fish soup. Your own childhood stemmed from the taste of egg flour broth your mother used to make. Coming home, a bubbling clay pot, steam rising from the lid raised by wooden chopsticks, the juicy cartilage between the softened bones. The butcher in England hasn't a clue if you ask for a soup bone. Say that again. The only one I can make nowadays is chicken and carrot, even without the fresh lo gai. You said that every Chinese woman must know how to make soup to catch a good husband, except that Alex has never cared because he is a European vegetarian. The hot and sour soup they have here, even in Royal China, is not half as good. It should have 7 ingredients. You can't call it hot and sour without wooden ear and pig's blood. Not authentic enough. I remember the milky white perfection of golden carp soup in our family haunt, the Tilin restaurant. You kept reminding me to make soup for myself, to build up my immune system, and also for beauty. Last time I called to say I cannot find the green carrots. They don't grow here. Each year I think of going back because of the soup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was a wonderful reading. And perhaps just to finish, would you like to? I understand you've lived in the UK now for many years. Looking back at your years in Hong Kong, would you like to share one snapshot memory of Hong Kong with us all? Something that you remember when you look back at your Hong Kong life?
Yes. The snapshot of memory that that really close to my heart is, for example, at Goose Neck flyover. It's kind of in Causeway Bay, under a flyover, and I can tend to see lots of women, like middle-aged women, helping to 打小人. It's like sort of the taboo, the Chinese taboo and superstitions practice. And I think it's like, for me, it's like a reminder that Hong Kong is a very steeped in its own traditions, and it's not, although it's very westernized in one hand, but it's also very Chinese and very traditional, very conservative. I think I can't find it anywhere else.
Yeah, thanks. And that really comes through in your new collection. I do encourage everyone to check it out. Letters Home. And as you can see from the cover, it's unashamedly polyglot, unashamedly transnational, and really embraces the traditional as well as the Western, as well as the Chinese aspects of Hong Kong culture and identity, and it's a wonderful collection. So thank you so much for reading for us this evening. So next we have joining us from Melbourne, Sree Sree is the author of the novel The Tiniest House of Time, a highly acclaimed novel described by Junot Diaz as a smart, beautiful, tough and wise book. Her previous book, Jungle Without Water, that's this one here, Chronicle, UNESCO Literary Review, Asian American Literary Review, Free World Centre London, Asia Literary Review, and more. She also guest edited the Hong Kong Special Folio for Drunken Boat during the Umbrella Revolution. Her academic works include publications in Southeast Asia Review of English and Writing and Pedagogy, and a forthcoming monograph with Routledge on authenticity in literary discourse. Sree currently lives and works at RMIT University in Melbourne and calls the world her home. Sree, so you spent several years in Hong Kong, and would you perhaps like to just tell us a little bit about what you were doing in Hong Kong at the time, and share a snapshot of memory of Hong Kong that's meaningful for you from your years in Hong Kong?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Anthony, for that lovely introduction. And yes, the first time I visited Hong Kong was in 2010, when I actually went as a student of the MFA program at City University Hong Kong. And it's a program that Sree was the head of, which is where I first met Sree. So it's literally been about 10 years since I've first been there. And I moved to Hong Kong in 2013 to do my PhD. And once I finished my PhD, I also worked at Lingnan as a writer in residence for about a year. So I'm really glad to hear Jenny mention Lingnan as well. And I sort of fell in love with the city very deeply. It really changed my perspective on many things, including my writing. And one of that was, witnessing the Umbrella Revolution in 2014, which had a very profound effect on me. And to answer your question regarding my snapshot memory of Hong Kong, it's really, in a way, about movement. My snapshot memory of Hong Kong is every time I have returned to Hong Kong from some other place in the world. It's about how I land at the airport, how quickly I pick up my luggage, how I always have to stop at the Crystal Jade outlet in the airport for their xiaolongbao. And I have to get to IFC and how quick the escalators will carry me through into IFC. And you go out to the pier past the city supermarket and you open the doors and suddenly you're out of the air condition and you're into the really crazy, humid, balmy air. No matter where you're coming from, whether it's winter or summer, you have that balmy air. And then queuing up at Pier 4 to get to Lama Island, which is a whole experience by itself. And then getting to Lama Island and getting to my spot from the pier, which takes about 10 minutes, and you go past seafood restaurants and tapas bars and Georgian restaurants and bakeries and then I have to go up these staircases making sure that I don't step on a snake by accident. And that's and that that whole thing from getting out of the aircraft to getting to my place takes about 90 minutes, which is pretty spectacular if you think about Hong Kong and think about the distance you've traveled. So yeah, that's been my repetitive snapshot memory of Hong Kong.
It's a wonderful journey through both space and time, really, isn't it, as you make that journey?
Yes.
So please go ahead. What are you going to read for us this evening?
Yes, so I've got two very short prose pieces. These were both written when I was writing for the Asia Literary Review, and they both encapsulate my memories, my reflections of Hong Kong. The first piece is called "I'm Walking Here," which is sort of a very short, snapshot, as you would say, just examining what it's like to walk in the streets of Hong Kong. And the second one is on the Umbrella Revolution, but I'll start with the first one. It's called "I'm Walking Here." You start from Cornwall Street out towards Mei Fu, past buildings that alternate between shiny and shabby, past screaming signs and traffic bustle, past your own frontier. Your feet do Tim Robinson's The Good Step on pavements past 2 meters and enter a supermarket world where everyone rushes to procure something: money, worth, love. There is no point to maps when there is enough to turn the mind inside out. The toy shop at the traffic corner where you are to turn to find the restaurant you need, or the shoe polish shop in the alley outside an MTR station. You say "Ngoy" several times within the first 20 minutes of the walk. Once it's to a well-dressed Chinese man with his back to you, having stopped short on the path as he delves into his smartphone. He says sorry in a light international accent as you hedge past. "That's all right, you jerk. I've done the same." He chuckles without once taking his eyes off the phone. It doesn't feel rude. Tall businessmen in Armani suits talk to themselves. A Sri Lankan domestic helper walks a poodle dressed in a pink tutu. Disabled beggars lie face down on tiled floors, unmoving as coins clink into plastic containers. Women with genuine Prada handbags strut with pursed lips, probably miffed at having to be walking on the street in the first place. 2 policemen speak roughly in broken English to an African-American male 3 times their size. A group of expats holding plastic cups of beer walk with their heads turning at the sight of any pretty Asian girl. Some Asian girls smile back. An old lady in a samfu and walking cane shuffles along, trying not to get in the way. You wonder how they would all describe you. You were always on the other side of things until here. Eavesdropping is useless now because all you hear are clatters of Cantonese, like a bunch of spoons falling to the floor all at once. Small talk with salespeople is out, but you have a troubled face, and another face will see it and come help. It is not what you are used to, strangers being compassionate as a reflex. You ask a bystander the way to an MTR station, and because their English isn't as good as yours, they decide to accompany you instead. When you don't understand the menu at a restaurant, you look at the waiter in confusion, and he brings you samples in small bowls so you know what you're getting into. You found your rental space because your real estate agent admired your literary and academic ambitions. Things in public, like chairs on a ferry or grimy cemented pavements, feel thin and temporary, as if made to mock your inner princess. They scare you into thinking you've arrived mistakenly, to the wrong place, away from the comfort of first world suburban Brisbane. You had couched yourself there, believing you belonged there, and you now react to anything that looks cheap, as if it would translate into your own worth. And things inside shopping arcades and office skyscrapers and hotel complexes hold whispered conversation, a fulsome brightness and the quietness of status, as if you must now prove your right to them with your pores. The money ladder here is taller than you know, and the rungs too slippery to find the right perch. Your upheaval to cosmopolitan Hong Kong has resulted in categories of belonging clashing so loudly you still have aftershocks in your head. You have been searching for your place for so long, wherever you are, you no longer know you are doing it. Malaysia, the land you were born in, is completely at odds with your adopted country, Australia. One is a land of old traditions scared of the new, leaning towards racial and religious fundamentalism. The other is too new to know itself, with pop culture so white a retrospect blackface skit on national television is still seen as funny. Like a rebel child refusing good-for-you greens, you resided in opposition to your habitat. You were stubbornly Asian in Australia. You had to leave your footwear at the door when visiting a friend. You had 16 different kinds of chili sauce in your pantry. You welcomed guests with open arms and waited on them hand and foot, bewildering them. In Malaysia, you displayed your Australianness like an inaccessible accessory. You exaggerate your Australian accent. You talked of the value of a classless society. You openly missed alcohol, offending some of your parents' friends. But now, in Hong Kong, each of these two women exists side by side. They have nothing left to say to one another. The concrete pavement is made up of elongated strips, like wafers arranged in a row of 3. The gritty edges contain weary histories, urban bustle, money-making law, the real maps. The resonances of this hub, teeming, overblown, draining, pulsate along with your rhythm. They rise up your feet as you plod, imbuing anonymity. It tingles you. You form yourself more, swinging, sashaying, imposing your movement onto this space, this grey, polluted air full of deliverance. So that's the first piece. And that was written
Oh, we seem to have lost Sree. I think her signal has cut out. Perhaps while we're waiting to try and get her back, perhaps if I understand Jason's been having some signal connections as well, but if he's there, perhaps we could go and turn to Jason next and then have Sree read her second piece when she can reconnect. I'm not sure if is Jason there. Jason, are you able to hear me okay? I think you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself and
hello,
there we are.
Can you hear me?
Are you there? Okay, yeah, I can. All right, great. Jason, let's turn to you, and hopefully Sree can rejoin us for her second piece when she reestablishes a connection. So everyone, our next reader, Jason Eng Hun Lee. Jason's a poet based here in Hong Kong. Jason's debut poetry collection, Beds in the East, published by Eyewear Press. And I'm sorry, Jason, I don't have a copy of it, so I can't display the cover for everyone, but the collection was a finalist for the Hong Kong U Poetry Prize and the Melita Hume Poetry Prize. Jason's poetry and reviews have been published in Acumen, Envoy, Quarterly Literary... Oh, there it is. Wonderful. Quarterly Literary Review Singapore, Oxford Review, Hong Kong Review of Books, Asiatic, and Cha, an Asian literary journal. He is the literary editor for the academic journal Post-Colonial Text and a current chief organizer for Poetry Out Loud, Hong Kong's longest running poetry collective, I'm sorry. Jason holds a PhD from the University of Hong Kong and lectures at Hong Kong Baptist University. Jason, I guess before you launch into your reading, you like I am still resident in Hong Kong, so perhaps it doesn't make sense to talk about memories of Hong Kong, but perhaps you want to, either before or after your reading, give a sense of what your message of hope for Hong Kong would be in this time.
Yes, thanks, Antony. Well, I came up with the title Hope for Hong Kong precisely because I think we're now coming to a phase where we've got to start looking at how the literary arts can actually deal with a lot of the problems that Hong Kongers are facing. We've had a year of protests. We've had a third wave of COVID. We're still dealing with the repercussions of what's happening around the globe and how Hong Kong is kind of sat in the middle of all that. What I've noticed in many of the events that I've been participating in and helping to run is that sense of fatigue. And what I want to do really, and what I hope can come out of this, is just a kind of to reconfirm the commitment of the literary community to the people of Hong Kong, and to let them know that, when things really get bad, there is always the literary arts to help people to heal, to make sense of themselves, and also to become part of a community. The community in Hong Kong is not completely gone. It might be dormant, it might be in hiding because of COVID, but there's still so much that the community can offer the people. So I hope that prose, creative nonfiction will allow people in Hong Kong to try and begin to really kind of allow themselves to move on. Because hard year for so many people in Hong Kong. IT are finding it difficult. So that's the kind of duty of care that I'd like to show people.
That's wonderful, Jason.
So
That's so.
Like me to read some poetry.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a wonderful message. It's so important.
That I'll read very quickly. Yeah. The first one is based on my observation. Okay, so I shall read 3 poems. The Lover's Bookstore will be the first one, which is based on my observations of going to one. Every corner broke down into books, books by the dozen, books littering our paths wherever we went. The aisles veered from us, discarding rows of books, turning them over leaf, as though books were not enough to satisfy our curiosity or our longing, as though books could not be believed until we had each other. 2. We had found ourselves in this bookstore, circling the same shelf from opposite ends, inching closer and closer, like bookends, touching each other through words, feeling as though all that we had read in love stories were propped up between us, crushed in our embrace. 3. Once we quoted books the same way we quoted our hearts, tracing sharp points across them, slowly, deliberately. Now we read them freely, hurriedly, as though tripping over their meaning, as though there were no time in a lifetime contained by books to cradle such words or tuck them away intimately, like bookmarks, into our memory. 4. Your gift to me was a book I hardly understood. What more implied the distance we would not cover than a book that represented you in every way? Alone, I am turning you over and over, again and again, staring at the words you meant to say but could not, thinking how you left me that day in that lover's store when your book closed and became mine. So that's the first of the 3 poems. The next one I'd like to read is kind of a poem that I wrote in response to a prompt based on the poetry of Octavio Paz. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to create this idea of responding to the built-up environment of Hong Kong with this idea that there could always be some sense of imagining greenery in the city. So this one's called The Green Heart. Here, no one listens to the rain, its nourishing sibilances. No butterfly flies between cars threading tales of transformation. No wind blows through streets, ferrying love messages between poplars. And no stone monument commemorates the heart's condition. Here, each tree comprises its own island, and each man is his own castaway. Yet I harbour a secret that none shall take away from me. In the will of wild murmurings that break through wind, water, stone, I shall never admit defeat in the city's concrete sea, where no voice sounds in the deep from the depths of traffic jams. And as the night solidifies and heaps its heavy weight upon my soul, my green heart starts to thump within and will go on thumping, and only I shall hear it sing. So that poem really tries to give this sense of defiance to the built-up environment. And it's that sense of self-affirmation that I want to carry through in the final poem, which I'll read today. And it's a poem which I've literally just started writing this week and finished today. So this is my first test run for the poem. And it's called A Hong Kong State of Mind. It's the presumption of guilt that drives us back into ourselves, into our very core, that ushers us back step by step through every unlearned word or slogan. It's the gaze that follows us home along corridors of regret, where every wall remains an unfinished canvas, or the stare that leaves each screen blank and each call or plea unanswered. It's the mask that stifles, however it is worn, and strangles every cry into a cry of despair. It's the touch that spells an act of longing. It's the longing that comes after a betrayal. But every act is still an act of living, a new beginning that grasps beyond itself. From each lonely child that rocks back and forth at night, cradling the promise of a word or declaration, to the artist forming murals in the sky of her mind, or the worker already ticking off tomorrow's labor. It's to preserve in every utterance a sign that this day will be followed by another day, that the air is still free, and the morning that greets and beckons you into song is still yours, and no presumption of anything beyond this act of living can stifle your will to live, and no state of the mind will ever drown that voice that calls from within. Okay, thank you. That's my 3 poems for Hope for Hong Kong.
Thanks, Jason. They're very, very powerful indeed, and a real message of hope and defiance. That was wonderful. Thank you. I believe we have Sree back online again now. So, Sree, if you're there, would you like to read us your second piece that we're all now on the edge of our seats waiting to hear?
Yes, thank you so much for that. I'm so sorry, just
Great.
my connection just dropped out.
No problem.
But yes, and thank you to Jason as well. That was a wonderful, wonderful set of poems. My second piece is actually set during the Umbrella Revolution. And if you notice, since the first piece was all about the second person point of view, this one is sort of third person collective. It's called They. And it's my musings on what was going on during the Umbrella Revolution. They already know, and they are ready. They are obediently disobedient. They have ingested the manual in their smartphones and iPad. It says not to respond to provocation with hatred. They have their umbrellas, but only because it rains. Their real armor is their smile. They first come out after asking permission from their teachers. Then they grow, gathering at intersections rather than conventional open spaces. Like their ideas and identities, their positions are at the points where different parts turn and cross. They know the power of occupying gaps in journeys. It makes those around them stop, look, respond. They cry in surprise at the tear gas, but they recover. Their tears are not new. They have been streaming for a while, love loaned out and returned because of expiry dates. Like a new bride on being sent back to dysfunctional parents. They open their umbrellas for themselves and for everyone else. They hold them over their policemen. They welcome all who come out to become them. They have the tents with free water bottles, biscuits, pizzas. They put up tables under ceiling sockets to create phone charging stations. They still shop but do not break windows. They hang up projections of support messages on social media from different parts of the world in about 20 languages. They quote Les Miserables and think it is V for Vendetta. They display banners in Chinese and English on pedestrian overpasses. They plaster posters quoting Abraham Lincoln and Karl Marx. They wave the torches in their smartphones like a forest of electric shine. They sleep on the streets. They twist yellow strips of fabric into ribbons and adorn themselves with them. They adorn the world with them. They gather at these crosspoints because that is where history halts sometimes, gauging a turn. They know history, like time, does not travel along straight lines but in spirals. A parallel event may and must have occurred in a different dimension for this to be possible. They understand they are the progeny of Mandela, King, Gandhi. They know the value of responding to blind power with gentleness, courtesy, song. Like their predecessors, they know passivity is infuriating. They know their weapon is their opponent's shame. They show their individuality by becoming collective. They coordinate in groups with minimal leadership. Their figurehead representative loads the attention on him and focuses on the task at hand, even after his arrest and release. They buy food in bulk and direct traffic. They protect stray dogs. They forward and share images and articles from their phones till their fingers hurt. Sometimes their connectivity is killed. They find alternative apps not requiring Wi-Fi. They will find a way, still. They know the obligations necessary to find their rights. They expand to include their peripheries. They accept the ethnic minorities and expats as guests morphed into family. They are now the American lawyer, the Macanese businessman, the Indian engineering student, the Nepalese journalist, the Pakistani butcher, the mixed heritage returnee, and the hyphenated coconut. They are all of them, and they will become more. They saw as they approach their deadline. They see and hear their chancellors, and they are now them too. The attacks have come. The violence, the ignorance, the blindness. They are now hurt. They sing and share online with a different tone. They can see the world watching. They now witness as much as they cause. They understand this. This has happened before. Some of them would have already known. It only means there is more to stand on. This is about them, but also not about them. This is about all they have ever known and all they were told of what was to be. Thank you. And that's that. That's the end of that. Thank you for being patient on this, everyone. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Sree. That was wonderful. Everyone, once again, this is Sree's first collection, Jungle Without Water, and the new novel, The Tiniest House of Time. I really am looking forward to reading, and by all accounts, it's wonderful. So congratulations on that too, Sree.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, you're welcome. Everyone, please do comment. If you comment in the comment box of whatever streaming platform you are watching us on, the readers will see your comments. So if you want to leave any feedback for the readers, we'll see that here. Elder in Portugal, we see you and missing you there. So please do comment. Next is Shushi. Shushi, probably of all the readers tonight, really needs no introduction. I'm sure everyone watching knows Shu. Shushi is the author of 14 books, including 5 novels, 1 memoir, 8 collections of stories and essays, and is editor or co-editor of 4 anthologies of Hong Kong literature. I am unable to hold up all 14 copies, but I'll hold up one, which is perhaps most germane to tonight's topic, Dear Hong Kong, which is Shushi's memoir of Hong Kong, and in many ways her farewell to Hong Kong. Her other recent titles include This Fish is Foul, Essays of Being, published by Nebraska and the American Live series, and Insignificance, Hong Kong Stories, published by Signal 8. The Art and Craft to Asian Stories, co-authored with Robin Hemley, is forthcoming from Bloomsbury next year. Shu is the co-author or a co-founder of Authors at Large, and recently has established the wonderfully named Mongrel Writers Residence, a private writers' residence for transnational and transcultural writers in the North Country of New York. And Shu is going to be having a reading series next week to launch that. An Indonesian, Chinese, American, diehard transnational. She is originally from Hong Kong and has until very recently lived most of her life in that city, but these days she splits her time between the state of New York and the rest of the world. Shu, welcome, great to see you. And before you start, what's your snapshot memory of Hong Kong, having it been now several years, I think, since you were last here, if I'm not mistaken?
Actually, it was 2018 when I left.
Okay.
And then I was back in 2019 for, the residency for the college. So it hasn't been that long, but my memory snapshot, and this is tied to a piece I just finished writing, is the Nullah. It's gone. The Nullah on Waterloo Road, north of Boundary Street. If you look straight down it, you could see the Lion Rock. I went to school at Maryknoll Convent School, which is just slightly north of Boundary Street. And the reason the Nullah comes to mind, 2 reasons. One, I'm really glad we don't have Nullahs anymore. They were like open skewers. We still have a few, but I mean, the history of the Nullah in Hong Kong is quite interesting. And it is actually a word from, I believe, it's from one of the Indian languages. It's not Chinese. But the other reason too is that what I remember thinking as a child when I first discovered that north of Boundary Street, where this Nullah went down, which was right in front of my school, was actually leased from China. That it was on the 99-year lease because it was technically the new territories and technically China. So I would think I was maybe 9 or 10 or maybe even younger. And I thought, every day when I go to school, I'm crossing over to China. So that's my memory, or one recent remembrance of Hong Kong.
Wonderful, and wonderful how the history of colonial and pre-colonial China and Hong Kong is sort of written onto the streets of the city, the geography of the city. But please, what will you read for us this evening?
Well, I'm going to read from a news story that's just come out in this crazy anthology that I'll put it up, The Darkling Halls of Ivy, and it was edited by the crime writer Lawrence Block. So when he commissioned me to write it, it was like, as long as it takes place in a university, you can write anything you want. So I did. And at the risk of borrowing from nature as a metaphor, this is all about nature as a metaphor, but the story is titled Monkey in Residence. And the one thing I refer to, I'll just read the first 8 minutes from the beginning of the story. The one thing I refer to, the vines, it doesn't get explained in the beginning, but it's the vines of morning glories that you see all over Hong Kong, those purple flowers that I used to love so much as a child. And I sort of made this story, the storyteller were those vines, okay? So since this is fiction, any resemblance in terms of the characters or the situations to people living or dead is purely coincidental. Monkey in Residence. In the spring of 2017, just after the grave-sweeping Qingming Festival, the government of the Hong Kong SAR proudly announced funding for a new academic chair position, Monkey in Residence, to be given to the public universities. Its objective was to honor our famous ancestor, that half-god, half-mortal monkey. Monkey, as everyone knew, had sired several heirs, and the dynasties of monkeys that followed were, the government claimed, a significant family of special Chinese citizens from whom we should learn more about our own history, travels, and culture. What better place than at those institutes of higher learning where young minds are molded and refined? All over the city, huge posters with the character monkey appeared, announcing a logo design and naming contest for the new chair position. The electronic poster was also all over the internet and even had its own Facebook page. And I'll show it to you right now. Money in Resident, logo, descent, and numbing concert for new Cha prize, $11,980.20. It took about a week, but the posters were eventually replaced with all typos fixed and the prize money corrected to $12,000. A government spokeswoman blamed the errors on their communications department intern from one of the university's English departments, whose recently appointed acting head was heard to declare, "My English is not very good, ha 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 ha." At least he was correct about that, his colleagues whispered, beleaguered as they were by the third acting head to be installed in less than 2 years. The government spokeswoman was, however, quick to add that this error is inconsequential as the Chinese language version is correct, and after all, most in Hong Kong know Chinese. Ha ha ha. Laughter by the powers that be had recently become a trend, a fashionable way to soften bad or fake news. Most of us nodded in agreement, although a few running dogs dissented, those long resident leftover colonial British or BBCs who neither read nor spoke Chinese. We wondered when these latter would get fed up and leave, sooner rather than later, some wished, although others said, why care as long as they fed our economy? And anyway, we whispered, English and Chinese, Mandarin and Cantonese are both our official languages, so we can be bi or even trilingual, right? Far more complaints were heard about the prize money. Where was the missing $19.80? Was this corruption or a mistake? Inquiring minds wanted to know on Weibo, Instagram, even on LinkedIn. Certainly, along our vines, the whispers spread across the city. Eventually, the government's financial secretary, FS, gave in after much pressure by the Dean of Business at HKU, the leading university. The FS was a graduate of HKU, but as everyone knew, his myopic focus on the bottom line greatly surpassed his common sense. Meanwhile, the excitement among Monkey's descendants was palpable. What do you think my chances are? Monkey Fire Hero III asked. At age 10, he was the eldest son of his generation and leader of the Fire Clan in Hong Kong. The grandeur and power of a chair professorship gleamed in his mind, although he was loath to admit it. His inner circle of younger male Fire Clan monkeys were quick to say he definitely must be the choice. After all, who else was more brilliant, more virile, more important than he? Flattery, they knew, would keep him calm. His violent temper erupted whenever his face was lost, which happened often given his propensity for pompous declarations about his power and achievements. They quickly diverted his attention by non-stop chattering. How do you think they'll make the decision? Is it one at each or just one position that all universities compete for? You don't suppose they'll consider this followed by a wince? Female monkeys, do you? Do you think he has to be a graduate from one of the universities, or if not, one who graduated with honors from a top international one? All the others tried to shush this last speaker. A young son-in-law who had newly entered the inner circle, he was unaware of a Monkey Fire Hero III's sensitivity about his abysmal academic record. As recently as last year, their leader had gone to great lengths again to try to have his grades altered or redacted and to have an honorary PhD conferred on him by either Oxford or Harvard. Unsuccessfully, as it turned out, because there was no one left to bribe or do his bidding. Really, at his age, they all whispered, wondering why it should matter anymore. Luckily, their great leader appeared not to have heard, his short attention span interrupting, as always. But their clan's chief financial officer, Dixon, a non-monkey human, declared, "This is a ridiculous idea." Dixon rarely spoke. When he did, the fire monkeys listened. There was a longish silence, punctuated by teeth-picking, spitting, and banana peeling. When in doubt, fire monkeys were given to the long pause. Finally, Fire Hero III himself spoke up. Why should that be ridiculous? Think about it, Dixon said. How many monkeys go to our universities in Hong Kong? 0. Okay, maybe a few of the crossbred monkey humans do, but they're mostly females, so they don't count because females can get away with treason. Most of the male crossbreeds hang out in the trees with you all. The government is just trying to placate you, to make you feel important so that you'll vote them back at the next election. It's all about politics, all about the restlessness among the intelligent beasts. Who among the beasts caused the most havoc at the last election? The monkeys, of course, since, and here he glanced sideways at the others, the smart humans know that monkeys, especially fire monkeys, are by far the most intelligent. So this is one of the FS's famous sweeteners. Toss them a bonus and they'll be content. He took a breath, sucked on his inhaler, and continued. Even you, Honorable Leader, and attended the University for Intelligent Beasts on the Chinese exclave island territory, Feiyu Dou. That's the natural order of things, where monkeys stick with their own kind and return to the threes. Thank you. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Shishi. That was wonderful, and with your always classic touch of humor and in there as well is great. Thank you. So the last reader this evening will be Ravi Shankar. Ravi is a Pushcart Prize-winning poet, editor, translator, and professor. He's published, edited, or has forthcoming over 15 books, including the Muse India award-winning translations of 9th century Tamil poet Sait Andal, The Autobiography of a Goddess, from Zuban University of Chicago, The Golden Shovel, new poems honoring Gwendolyn Brooks from University of Arkansas, and his new and selected poems, The Many Uses of Mint, there it is there, a wonderful collection spanning some 2 decades of work from Recent Works Press, as well as W.W. Norton's Language for a New Century, which was called a beautiful achievement for world literature by Nobel laureate Nadine Gordimer. Ravi founded Drunken Boat and currently holds an international research fellowship from the University of Sydney. His memoir, Correctional, is forthcoming in 2021 with University of Wisconsin Press, and I, for one, are very much looking forward to reading that. Ravi, welcome. You spent some time, I know, in Hong Kong on the faculty of the City UF MFA, among other times. What's one of your fond memories of the city?
Well, Sree mentioned Llama Island, and when you asked that question, I immediately thought of a trip that we took, a number of our faculty out to Llama. And one of the things about Hong Kong is it's a great hiking city. And it took me a few visits to realize, because you're in the midst of so much commotion and people, and yet when you go to Lantau or Llama, there are these wonderful walks. And I just remember this afternoon so vividly. We ate at a little seafood restaurant along the shore, and we had this kind of, to be in this space so close to Hong Kong and yet in a totally different, peaceful moment. Of course, I also think of the food. The food is so fabulous. I remember Shushi and the faculty would always eat at this place called Mask of Szechuan, which had this wonderfully spicy Szechuan food that I still think about today. And certainly all of my colleagues. I remember when we have our discussion, Shushi, I don't remember his name, but a journalist who owned a jazz club, who we met, and this was over a decade ago, and he was very prescient and kind of foretold what was happening. He said that, in fact, he felt free speech was already being curtailed then. He was very afraid of what might transpire, and true enough, most of what he prognosticated has come to pass. So I feel really deeply emotionally connected to Hong Kong and miss the country terribly, and I'm thinking about everyone there.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So what will you be reading for us this evening?
Okay, so I'm going to read some new poems. I'll read one poem from the Many Uses of Mint to start, and then I'm going to read a couple of newer poems. In this first poem, I'll read, I was asked to commission to write a poem on the 1000th anniversary of Ovid's death in 2018. Ovid, the great Roman poet, of course. And Recent Works Press asked a number of international poets to choose one of the tales from Ovid's Metamorphosis to write about. And so I'll start with this. This is about Ersicton, who was the Thessalian king, who, I don't know if you remember, in Ovid, he was told not to cut down a holy tree that the dryads used to have their celebrations, in that kind of oak tree. And of course, he didn't listen to his advisors, and he chopped the tree down, and he was cursed with the curse that this poem describes. So this is called The Acorn and the Hungry King. And it has a little epigraph from Ovid that goes, he in sleep, in imagination, dreams of feasts, closes his mouth on vacancy, grinds tooth on tooth, exercises his gluttony on insubstantial food, and instead of a banquet, fruitlessly eats the empty air. The Acorn and the Hungry King. The voice inside the oak sings a high tannic note, bitter and herbaceous, like squashing a sodden tea bag on your tongue until your throat contracts in revulsion. Those who say its song rounds out a good sherry ignore repressed memories of blood inside the wood, the trauma of the swung axe blade in Ceres' coppery grove, where the dryads once held their ancient sacred dances, writhing under votive tablets and garland wreaths. Bite into an acorn and you'll taste the faint sweat of those nymphs before the aftertaste curdles your stomach with fire. Desire, the Buddhists advise, tanha, that Pali word, remains unquenchable, bottomless, a belly ravaged by famine, like the curse that befell old Ersicton, the Thessalian king, when he filled the massive oak, then fell himself, first ear-sick, then heart-sick, then forever ravenous, munching the air to breathe, swallowing whole olives, pit and all, sucking honey from the bees' hives and milk from the very udders of his royal cows. The more he devoured, the more he had to devour. But it was like pitching drachmas into the Aegean. He drained each amphora only to grow thirstier. He ate until he had his fill, and he never had his fill. Finally, he began to gnaw on himself, beginning with his digits, then his hands, then his very arms up to the elbow and beyond, crunching bone and sinew. Isn't that the meaning of craving, the nature of addiction? The hunger sunk deep inside of you that tries and tries and tries and tries, but can't get no satisfaction. The dead man, as a living man, devours a dead man, himself, still alive, but slowly, surely dying in excruciating agony. That's us burning coal and hacking down rainforests. That's us at the turn of the millennium. Think of him next time you order a particularly oaky Chardonnay. So that's from the Many Uses of Mint. Again, I'm really happy with how this collection turned out. It's new and selected poems from 1998 to 2018. And then I'll finish with some newer poems. And I saw that Indran Amirthanayagam was watching, and he's the poetry editor of the Beltway Poetry Review. And I just have a few new poems that just were published yesterday. And I thought I would read one of them. And it so turns out that I'm writing poems that have as their title either a phrase from Latin or in emoji. I don't know really how this happened, but I kind of do. I was speaking to a linguist who believed that eventually we would all be speaking in pictorial language and that emojis were the language of the future. And he meant it as a warning, but I actually thought about the possibilities of that. And so I'll just read you one of these. This is the emoji of the kind of the sad face. And a couple of words. A ferule is a stick that's sometimes used to punish people, but the kind of stick of an umbrella. And there's the name of a couple of mushrooms, wild mushrooms here. Satyr's beard and bleeding tooth are the name of wild mushrooms. And so this is little sad face emoji. When I heard about the millennial zeitgeist, I put up my umbrella. Not because I needed safe space, but precisely because the wilderness had shrunk into a ferule that required a crook handle. They wanted me not to remind them of the weather I was protecting myself from. That's why I could never call them snowflakes. They're not aimless appearing nor blizzards of one falling from strand shadow of domes. They're buzzy, Snapchatting echo boomers whose refresh rates still don't cut down on lag. Their kids will be found wearing head-mounted displays and juddering from simulator sickness. Call me an alarmist. Turn me into the meme of the old man yelling at the crowd. I still trigger warnings about the dangers of bubble wrap when it comes to foraging for wild mushrooms. They'll miss the satyr's beard and the bleeding tooth blooming under the reverse globe of my teardrop. That's all I'm trying to say, but they don't hear me. All right, and I'll just finish with two other ones. These are the ones that come from the kind of Latin strand of this book. And this poem is about the COVID-19, especially how it has affected us here. I'm speaking to you from the North Shore of Boston. And I wrote this poem after discovering someone I knew, a grocer at a local grocery store, had passed away from the virus. And I only, someone I had interacted with dozens of times. And of course, I had only said thank you and didn't really get to know her, but I had interchanged with her. And I saw in the Boston Globe that she had passed. Her name, Vitalina Williams, and this is called Latin for Life. A migraine so jasmine that it clings to the cortex like a floor-length drape that obscures any view from the window. Copley Square shines barren of the unmasked, and even there scant, dispersed among the traces of spring which begin invisibly in the damp smell of earth and the tentative buds of silver maples. Am I getting sick? Are you well? A virus inhabits the gray zone between the animate and inanimate, spreads unseen from touch, breath, the very qualities that make us human. Staying at home isn't a personal choice, it's an ethical duty, urges a retweeted headline while I eat my yogurt. It's also the purview of the privileged, those of us who can Zoom from home and still collect a paycheck. The woman who bagged my groceries, Guatemalan, is dead. I just read about her in the Boston Globe and recognized her by her half smile, by her fingers. Vitalina Williams was her name, and she survived by a husband who could not get close enough to her in the hospital to say goodbye. He tells a reporter, nobody's to blame and everybody's to blame. She wasn't given a mask because there weren't any. The man who unloaded pallets of dairy products from the back of a tractor trailer might be getting sick, and the migrant workers who work on farms might be exposing themselves to deadly pathogens so that we can all stay safe. That's democracy now. That's the line between the haves and the have-nots. There's a metaphor here, I think, hating myself for thinking figuratively in the face of literal work. How a virus attaches to a host cell, then penetrates to replicate itself until it bursts from the membrane, killing its host. It's stunning to see under the eye of an electron microscope, aesthetically pleasing even, a haloed Helen Frankenthaler abstraction. Although all I can see in mid-morning's throbbing light is Vitalina's dark eyes and her brown fingers, meticulously sorting the pasta sauce into one bag and the eggs into another so that they won't break. Rest in peace, Vitalina. And I'll just finish with one final poem. It's a little bit longer. This poem I was asked to contribute to an anthology about Vincent Chin. And I don't know if people know Vincent Chin, who in Detroit in the 80s was, though he was not Japanese American, Chinese American, was killed by a couple of auto workers, beaten to death. And those two auto workers didn't serve a day in jail. They got probation and had to pay a small fine. And his death actually was a catalyst for bringing together and unifying communities of color, Asian communities, regardless of where they're from. And so this will be my final poem. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks to all of you. And let's continue to keep Hong Kong in our mind. This poem is called Latin for New World Order. Over a plate of 3-bean salad, a Jamaican friend confesses between bites, he hates people of color. Not us as beings, but the phrase itself, the way it turns each unique polyvalent human monolithic as Stone Mountain in Atlanta, whose north face bas-relief depicts Confederate President Jefferson Davis, General Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson, who, as a kid, I'll admit, I thought was a bona fide badass tactician. The angry pain that image elicits each time he visits the ATL sears him differently than it does me. You mean no, you're not black, he says, a cannellini being speared on a raised fork for emphasis, affecting his best ludicrous imitation, which I don't tell him could be its own form of cultural appropriation, given, as he often reminds me, he's from the land of Antillean grackles, callaloo, spidery mangroves, and kicking up the rumpus. Still, I see his point. Lumping together Mashantucket Pequot, Creek, Navajo, Choctaw, and Lakota people as Native Americans, yoking the granddaughter of an Alabama sharecropper descended from slaves with a Singaporean American banker who flew first class to move into a lower Manhattan brownstone, well, POC has its problems, true, just as the median economic indicators of Asian Americans ignores the struggle of the Hmong, Bhutanese, Cambodian, or Bangladeshi immigrant communities in cities from sea to shining sea. Thinking of how to respond to my Kingston friend, I suddenly conjure Saint Vincent Chin, the Chinese-American draftsman who was celebrating his bachelor party in Highland Park, Michigan, 1982, when he was mistaken for being Japanese by a Chrysler plant supervisor and his stepson, a laid-off auto worker who blamed Toyota, Honda, and Nissan for his own misfortune. Handsome Vincent Chin, in suit and glasses, or a gold medallion, that luxurious mane of hair, his whole life ahead of him, beaten to death with a baseball bat by 2 white men who didn't spend a day in prison. Their second-degree murder charge was pled down to manslaughter, and they were sentenced to pay no more than probation and a $3,000 fine. In a letter, the presiding judge wrote, "These weren't the kind of men you send to jail," which begs the question, what kind of men do you send to jail? The case joined Asian Americans across ethnic lines helping shape multiracial alliances to advocate for civil rights, which is my answer to the POC conundrum. I'm a Tam Bram Am, a Tamilian Brahmin American, also a man of color who's been slurred, jailed, mocked, discriminated against innumerable times. There's strength in solidarity and amplification in knowing those of us with skin darker than a grocery bag, a heritage traced back to conquest and colony, have a community who collectively can speak discontent to privilege with greater force. We must all hang together, or more assuredly, we will all hang separately, to crib the famous anti-classicist of kite-flying Benjamin Franklin, who, while inventing bifocal glasses and dreaming up the lightning rod, decried low women, labeled Native Americans drunken savages who delight in war and take pride in murder, and described African Americans as sullen, malicious, revengeful, and by their very nature, thieves. He also owned slaves while later serving as a president of an abolitionist society hard to find an acronym for, the Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery and the Relief of Negroes Unlawfully Held in Bondage. While less than 3 months before he died, he petitioned Congress to provide the means to bring slavery to an end. Deep within the American character, there festers such raw, scabrous, unresolved contradiction. On the U.S. seal Franklin designed and placed under the disembodied eye crowning the pyramid on the dollar bill, there's a Latin phrase, Novus Ordo Seclorum, or a new order of the ages, though Franklin preferred the motto, rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. What should Vincent Chin's family make of that advice? How about Srinivas Kuchibotla, the affable Indian-American engineer from Hyderabad, shot dead in Olathe, Kansas by a bar patron who mistook him for Iranian, shouting, "Get out of my country, terrorists," and "Are you legal?" before murdering him in cold blood. He could have so easily been me, even if I was born congenital disease-free in Washington, D.C. on the Sunday the Pittsburgh Steelers won the Super Bowl. That's why Black Lives Matter. That's why human rights. That's why I consider myself a POC, even when I'm wary that the term is too generalizing, maddeningly PC, imprecise. I make my claim. My buddy smiles a wry smile, finishes his salad, and bikes off into the corncob-robed afternoon. A new order of the ages means it's not just an ethical, but a civic duty to fight inequity and uproot racism in any form we find. If anyone were to ever dispute us, just show them the back of a dollar bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ravi. That was great. So I think that brings us to the end of our readings, and I think we've just almost up on an hour and a half, which I think is about the limit of people's tolerance for online events. I don't know about all of you, but certainly after such a wonderful series of readings, I'm feeling inspired, invigorated, ready to face tomorrow in Hong Kong, whether it's COVID blue or tropical depression gray, with renewed hope. So I want to thank all of our readers, Ravi, Jennifer, Jason, Sree, and Shushi. Thank Ravi for taking the controls of the technical issues here tonight and coordinating everything. Thanks to Jason, who was really the driving force between getting this event together, and it's been really wonderful. So thanks, Jason. Thanks also to Sally Breen and Asia Pacific writers and translators and everyone there. It's a wonderful organization, and certainly for any of you who are watching who are not members and who are either a writer or a translator in the Asia Pacific region, I highly encourage you to join and take advantage of the many benefits that membership brings. So with that, thank you very much. Good evening or good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. And I guess my final message would just be, 香港人加油. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anthony. It's great to be with you all. Take care.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye, everyone.